Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be taking a look at speeding up your creative process significantly. So, writer's block is largely a preventative disease. If you just take the correct steps, you can avoid writer's block to a large degree. And it comes down to having your goal in mind and understanding how to break down songs, which we have been looking at the 5 major components of songs in the previous videos. And so I'm going to assume that you understand with a fair degree what these terms mean when I say them. Not what you think when you read them, what they mean when I say them. Because this understanding how they work in the context of a larger structure, because we talked about, for example, structure here, right? We can zoom in on different levels of structure. If you had a map, you could zoom in on a portion of the map. And this can mean that these terms can mean different things. So I'm understanding you understand them the way I do because of the previous videos. So we say, okay, we're going to come up with our game plan. We're going to break it down into 5 pieces. And by doing this, we're just going to be loads faster. And the reason is you're always going to know what you want to do next. It's just going to be so much easier. It's that Einstein thing. If you think about the problem, he spends most of his time thinking about the best method to solve the problem. And then, he spends a very small amount of time actually solving it because it's all been laid out. He's like, oh, I have the best method for doing this now. This works for anything. So for your goal, you could be like, okay, I want to write an alternative rock pop song. I want to write a 808 beat. I want to write a chiptune song. You write down whatever your goal is. The more specific you are, the more specific you can be when you're working. And you can do this a lot quicker. Now, I'm claiming this will speed it up. I'm not claiming that this is like the magic pill that will solve every problem you ever have. This should just get you rolling way faster because starting a song is often the toughest part. So the first thing we do is we define our goal, and then we go into our 5 major components. I've included some extra categories that we'll be covering in later videos, but I felt like I should at least list them here and ignore some of the decisions I made. Also, if there's a spelling error somewhere on here, it doesn't have spell check, so I'm sorry about that. So we have sound, structure, melody, harmony, and rhythm. Those are our 5 major components. And so I started off with sounds. You may order these differently according to what your goal is. So I said, my goal is a basic 808 beat, and it's clearly a sound type thing. I'm not worried about structure as my principal concern. The 808 in there is the big word. And when I say 808, I'm thinking of just the boom, 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 those kind of kick drums, the big, long kick drums. So it's like, I just want something that with a cool one of those in there, one of those 808s. So I said sounds. We remember from sounds that we define our emotion and the place we want to be. What is the emotion I'm after? I'm like, I want a dark emotion. It's a vague thing. It's going to be a vague term that's personalized to you. So I'm going to write it. I could be more specific. I could be dark. I don't want to be creepy though. So I might write like not creepy or something and go on and get into more detail. The better you can define this, the easier it'll be for you later on. So I say, okay, I want dark. In the place, I said open field. This one's a little ambiguous. I wasn't quite sure where I wanted it to be, but I'm going to put something so that at least I have an idea of what I'm going for. And so we say, okay, dark, open field. Maybe I'm in a large cement room that's sort of run down a bit. Something of that nature is what I'm thinking of. Then for the sounds, my actual sounds, I know I want to use a flute. So some sort of a flute. A synth bass. And so in this one, so the flute, I don't include, we talked about the 3 methods of generation for sound. I didn't include which one. I said, let the flute be generated however, I don't care. So I wasn't like a sampled flute or a synthesized flute. And I actually used both of those in there. So I didn't care how the flute was made, but I was specific. I wanted a synth bass. And I could use a sample synth bass. I mean, those exist. That's Retro Machines is a library in Contact that are sampled basses. But I just said synth bass. I knew I wanted something like that. And then I had Atmos pad chords. So atmospheric pad chords. I was thinking long tones, long textures. That's why I included Atmos. So I have my sounds down. So now when I'm working, I can just immediately, I'm like, cool, what do I want to include here? I can just go bam, 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 and include my sounds. You can include things like drones. We could go on for quite a while, but this is just a basic beat. I didn't want to do anything nuts. I just wanted something real simple. So I said, cool, that's there. Now I'm going to consider my structure here. And I thought about which one of these I wanted to do next. And I was like, I'll do my structure next. And so I said, introduction. What am I going to do for my intro? Well, first I wrote out, okay, structure. Let's write out our structure. So I'm like intro, and then I want an A section, a B section, and a C section. I was like, I knew I wanted that. And then I said, okay, after that, what do I want to do? And I thought about it and I said, I'm going to do a B prime. And I'm not sure how it's going to be different, but I said, I want a B prime section. And right now it's like, I'm just coming at it's such a general thing. Like we can get more specific later on. So I'm like B prime, and then I'm like maybe a C prime because I want a second verse, chorus, whatever it's going to end up being. And then I'll recap the A and then do an outro. Like, why not? That sounds like a good plan. And so you see, that's what I ended up doing up here. And then I included what I wanted during those different sections. And this can get very specific. I could write about harmonic development there. I could write about rhythmic and melodic development here. The structure can sometimes be a very long thing. And the better you have this, the easier it'll be to lay it out, and the faster it will begin to sound like music. You may also consider writing bar numbers next to it. So you might be like, I want this to be 8 bars. And you may also consider doing tempo at this point in time. So I'm like, 808 beat, whatever, 90 beats per minute, right? That sounds like a good, fair tempo. So 8 bars, and then I might come in here, A section, it's going to introduce the drums, probably a good 8 bars. Maybe for the B section, I'll be jamming at this point. That's the goal. So I do 16 bars. C section, 8 bars. Like, you go through and you make these decisions, and you can always come back and change them. You're just getting some ideas down. You're getting some direction. So now we have a structure in the sounds. Like, we've already got a huge chunk of the song, but there are 3 other elements, right? We have melody and theme. So I'm like, cool. What kind of melody do I want? And I chose here, I said, I'm going to leave it out for vocals. So there's not going to be that much going on. But I said, maybe I'll use the flute to create some sort of a thing that resembles a melody. But I said, maybe flute, and I could even put like, not focal point next to it. So it's like, it's not the main idea. If anything, it's going to be very minimal. Something that might fit better into the rhythm category. And then theme driven, I said, I'm going to, as far as theme driven is concerned, that's tied in with the vocals, but the long is a reference to the flute. So these are just some of the ideas I was going through. Then I said, okay, harmony. What do I want to do with the harmony? We remembered that this harmony is specifically referring to the way we reveal the key to the listener. Do I want to be ambiguous about it or not? What key do I want to work in? I'm like, I'm going to work in A minor. That sounds like a good enough key. If you don't know scales, you can just pick a set of notes and literally just write them out. That way, first off, this will just help you music theory wise a lot. But when you come back in here, you can make these changes. You're just being made conscious of what it is you're doing harmonically. Maybe it's not going to be a harmonic piece. Maybe you would write none, or I don't know at this moment in time. But you generally want to get some sort of idea. So if you're going to do something atonal or based more on a beat or rhythm, you could write beat based. But if you have any sort of notes, you're going to be using some sort of harmony. And so at that point, I'd write it down. I'd get something here. And then I said standard block chord. So I said whatever it is I'm doing, they're going to be chords that happen every bar. That's it. I'm not going to do anything crazy with chord changes or anything like that. Nothing complex harmonically in this song. So this is a weaker element. And then rhythm, I said I'm going to do 4/4 built on drums and chord blocking. So this is a background element move. I said I'm just going to use my drums to outline my rhythm principally, and I'm going to use chord blocking to just help out the drums. And that's all I'm going to do. You could include things like going to intertwine with melody, going to do this, going to do that. So there's room for just tons. If you can think of writing it there and having it as a forethought before you begin creating, this is all help. Now, something I didn't include up until now is transitions. So we say, what am I going to use for my transitions? Is it going to be music based? Like I'm going to use melodic elements. Right? That meaning I'm going to write my melody in such a way that it will create the transition for me. Or am I going to use drum fills? Maybe I'm going to have some sort of a drum fill breakdown. Is it going to be a color shift? Meaning I'm going to take sounds that already exist and shift them into new sounds and then assign those old sounds new roles. Like, how am I going to do my transitions? Am I going to use, this is the most common one by far, effects. Am I going to use like the any of those types of things. In EDM, you're probably going to be using drum fills and effects. In hip hop, it could be a mix of all of these things. If you're doing orchestral work, it's probably going to be color shifts. So you just have tons and tons of options. We also have the arrangement, which is a combination of melodic elements and color shifts. And again, we could get more detailed here. Mixing, on our mixing category, we can include, okay, so you see, we not only have we got down our sound, but now in our structure, and by the way, the structure is like ultra super key important for this process. But now we can go into mixing and be like, okay, order of sound importance. Well, okay, so mixing is like the overall sound of your track. This is usually something you look at the end. But now you can say, okay, we'll come up with our categories, which are generally, we have drums, synths, vocals, and if you have guitars or piano or something, that you list out your different categories you intend to use. And then you would write down what is the most important thing. Like, what are you going to focus it around? You see drums here, I have kick, but I could easily name and easily say, consider the whole. And this just means I'm going to process my whole drums just through a bus. Or maybe I'll do like a kick separate and then my snare separate. And then I'll do the rest through consider the whole, meaning the rest will go through a bus and they'll be bussed with the kick and snare. You know, you get really specific, but you write it all out. And this just really helps you sort of pinpoint how you're going to start, where you're going to go, how you're going to do it. And I have whole series on how to do mixing. So I'm going to largely leave mixing out of the equation for this. I'm at a point now where I've done this so many times that I generally don't write out my mixing steps. And I've noticed that when I do write out my mixing ideas before I do them, my mixing usually turns out substantially better. Just because, or I'm a lot more clear in what I'm going for, because you have that ambiguity of like, oh, do I want this? Do I not want this? Because a lot of people, they just start with their kick drum. Like they think, oh, the kick is the most important thing. And a lot of times it's really not. And changing it. So if you hand off your stuff to a professional mixer, they get to decide this stuff. Like you don't have a say, and maybe you want your vocals to be a bit heavier. Now you're paying them, so they're going to consider your opinion, and you could just, well, they have to. You have to deliver what the client wants to hear, but you're basically saying, I want your take on how this should be done when you hire a mixer. I've had other clients though who are like, no, you're going to mix it my way or the highway, just because they don't know how to do mixing. You have those relationships too. And so there's a give and take with clients, and you got to find a happy medium. Each one will want you to mix it for you. The other one will want you to do your own thing. But this mixing to me is like such an integral part of the song that I have a hard time handing it off. Anyways, you write it out. You come up with your categories, and then you write out what you're going to do for each category. So if you have vocals, then which vocal is the lead vocal is going to, well, you pick which vocal is going to be the most important vocal. So first we'd be like, oh, one is our lead vocal. Do we have a harmony part? And then do we have background parts? And what kind of background parts do we have? Those kinds of things. Maybe you just have one vocal and then you have your synths. Also on the lead vocal, if you're going to be using doubles, I would write down what I'm going to do to the doubles separately. I would consider panning. All those types of moves should be considered here. And then we also have mastering. So mastering is something I'm not going to jump into right now. But as general categories for mastering, you could consider what type of compression, bus compression are you using in the mixing, and how will that affect your mastering? So your mix should always be as amazing as it could possibly be before you go into mastering. Some people like to work with mastering chains on, so you could write that in here. I talk about why I generally don't do this, but I would write like mastering chain active while I'm working, and then I could drop in like compression. Am I going to do multiple plugs doing small amounts of gain reduction for my compression, or am I going to do one big plug that does a lot of gain reduction, which is sort of popular today? Am I going to do what kind of EQ? Am I going to give it a general boost? Am I going to throw a console emulation plugin on there? What sample rate? This is something like if you haven't recorded, if you're going to use recordings, sample rate, bit depth are considered up here, but consider how they'll be affected here at mastering. So it'll just make you think a little more critically about what you're going to do down here. These topics are topics I'm generally just going to leave out because we're focusing on the composition and production of a beat. But you get the idea. So at this point, we have like freaking thought this song out like crazy. Like we're like solid, good to go. This can be, if you're doing something simple, this can be a simple 5-minute process. If you're doing something complicated, this can be a much longer process, but it allows for the construction of very specific things in a much more efficient manner than just getting started. Sometimes you approach projects that you just simply can't get away with doing it without doing something like this. Like, you have to come up with some sort of a plan. So it's just a good habit to get in, is coming up with some game plans. So now that we have that, we will begin construction, in this case, on what I call the pattern block workflow. There are other workflows out there, but this one lends itself to this particular project because my goal is a basic 808 beat. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to go to what I call the loop. So what I started with was nothing. But now I can begin construction. So I say, what in my plan is going to make this thing the way it sounds? And I looked at my structure first. I know it says basic beat 808. So I'm like, oh, probably my drums. I looked at my structure first and thought about the flutes. And I already had decided a thing for my flutes. And so I loaded up a quick flute thing. But then I went to my 808. So I did construct my drum first because this is what it's based on. And I said, I want an 808 drum. So I went ahead and started doing sound design, and I came up with this. I said, cool. And then I finished it up with this. I layered it with a sample. And so I was like, cool, I have a basic rhythm. It's not totally incredible, but I'm going to rely on some stuff coming up later on. And I filled out the rest of the drum beat with just a hi-hat and a snare. And I was like, simple, nice, it's good to go. So next I was like, all right, my next sound I have on here, I've listed a flute. And I had an idea with this flute. So I loaded up a instance of Reactor and an instance of Steam Pipe inside Reactor. And it's really great ensemble in Reactor. And they have a bunch of really cool flute-based synthesis models. And so I said, well, models based on tones that are similar to a flute. And I actually settled on the pipe organ, ironically, but I came up with this as my opening line because I'm also constructing my intro. So I'm just going to make stuff that jams together, and then I'm going to pull it apart and construct my structure after I have everything together. So I knew that my flute was not going to be some incredible melody thing. I wanted it to be theme driven, so I wanted it to be repetitive in nature, but I didn't want it to have... I actually ended up ignoring this long. That's just something I wrote it down, thought I was going to use it, didn't use it. That's just, sometimes it's how things go. And so I wrote out this. So I'm like, I've already got like a little vibe going. I'm like, cool, I'm aiming for it. I'm nailing my emotion down a little bit more. And it's dark, but it's not creepy. It's like, I think I did okay. So next I decided to work on adding in more of my elements. So I said, okay, synth bass. And so I'll add that in. And for my synth bass, I chose to use Monarch because I really like that sound. I'm a big fan of it. So I added that in. I kept it simple. I'm going to keep saying that, but that's just, I wasn't going for anything crazy. And then I was like, all right, next up, Atmos pad chords, and that should fill it out. So I did that. And then I went back to this melody idea with the flute, and I said, I can add in another flute. I think another flute would be cool. So now I'm being inspired, but I've gotten through the first several steps really quickly. I'm just like, bam, 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 like out the door it goes. And now I did spend a while working on this just because I spent a little longer than I want to admit working on that. But the point is, I had a direction. I was going somewhere. I had a clear goal. And once I was there, I was there. I knew I was there and I could move on. And so that's so useful in creative work. So next up, I added in another flute. This time I used an instance of Contact, and I'm using the sampled flute from over here. So I went ahead and did that. So now I have what I call the loop. The loop has now been accomplished and we are good to go. So next up, I'm going to now focus on my structure. So now that I have my sounds and I've established the standard block chords by the use of the arpeggiations. So I wasn't sure if I was going to use total long tones. In the Atmos chords, because of the sound I settled on, by the way, that sound is a massive patch. It's called Astral Saw. If you have the expansions, I'm not sure where. It's in one of these expansions. I went dug through there and found that patch. But I could make it pretty easily. It's not a hard sound to make. But because I know the nature of the sound I want, you are now able to take advantage of the fact that it says synth pad and just look up atmospheric pad chords. They even have you go airy pad, basic pad. It's super useful to be able to do that. When you do your sound design, include those elements so that when you do this, very useful. So they integrate with each other better now. These, because of the way the verb on them and the way they ring out, I was going to write out longer chords, but I ended up just using just that little segment because that's all I needed. So once I have this, I'm moving into my structure now. So first I drop it down. I drop down several, and then I say, okay, for my melody, for the intro, I said that I wanted a intro with a flute. I didn't have the 8 at the time, but I wanted a flute in there, and this was going to form my introduction. And I know I was keeping in mind what I wrote down for my melody and theme. It's relatively vague, but I already have a small flute line working together. So I said, oh yeah, I can do this. So I decided to let the sample contact flute do its thing for a little bit, add in the second flute on the second phrase to form a musical sentence, and that would give me the get-go into the drum beat. And I did on part A, I knew I wanted drums to come in. I already had that. So I was like, cool, I'm going to move into the drums from here. I didn't include my transitions. This is where I'd consider my transition too. But I wanted my transition to be a melodic element transition. I didn't want to have to rely on effects or anything. And so I went ahead and split up the beat. So I cloned it, deleted everything I didn't wanted, and I extended it a little bit and wrote out a new line. And it ended up coming out like this. So you see, there it is. It's I just took that loop and I'm now developing it, and it was really, really easy to do. I'm still not completely happy with the mood here, and this is where I might listen, get a little more inspiration, because I was not able to foresee exactly what it was going to sound like. And so now I might consider adding a drone effect of a drone sound automation. And what I'm thinking, what that means to me is I'm going to get a sound that's like some drone atmospheric pad. If I were to go to Leviathan, let's see here. Where are you? Black Octopus, Leviathan. Is it in this one? I think it's in Leviathan part 2. Nope, it's in part 1. Atmospheres. One of those. And I would take it and I would filter it and bring it in and stuff. I might consider also writing down my processing. A lot of this stuff, you only need to write down enough as to remind you what you want to do. But the more you do get down, the better it is. And the more you do this, the more it'll just be in your head, and you can sort of have little codes that mean things to you. You might put a lowercase AU for automation or something. I'm going to automate the volume on this, or I'm going to use a compressor on this, stuff like that. But anyways, now that's an element I might consider, because now I can begin refining and structuring it and making it more of something special and unique, instead of having trouble finding my groove, my song. Where is it? I don't know. So, okay, we go to A. Next up, I'm like, okay, part B. Part B is going to be 16 beats long, and I have a couple elements I still have not included, so I could bring those in. So I said, all right, let's do that. And also when I cloned it, I cloned part 4 again and changed up the flute line to keep things interesting. This is something I do all the time. And I'll take something like this and I'll merge the pattern clips together so that they're one idea. It helps me work. A lot of people also, they'll split this out into 7 parts. To me, because of the way I work, that's that could be horribly confusing for this type of a workflow. But if you're doing things that are based on repetition parts and you like to work with like blocks of, it used to be called blocks and things, and you like to put them together almost like a Lego set, and you have like a component here and a component here, that could be really cool. For this particular thing, I wasn't working that way, but I might even consider cloning these and changing up parts subtly. So that hi-hat line is just repeating. So I might change that a little bit. Change maybe the velocity values, small stuff, so that it's not like a different part, but it still sounds varied and interesting to listen to. Okay, so I got to B, and on B, I add in a couple new parts. After that, I jump over to C because I'm like, cool, I have B running for me. Now let's do C. C is what I'm sort of envisioning as the chorus or whatever, but it ended up being a kind of a breakdown. So the vocalist would have room to improvise here. And I thin out my stuff. I say, oh, let's take some things away, give it some room. That flute's been going on for a while, so it would be kind of nice to have that go away. And I might even, now that I have written this out, change the chords here. Maybe make this be something new and maybe develop that harmonic progression into this next section. Like you see, we're beginning to have our options become a little more clear and a little easier to work with. So we get to B prime, and I knew I wanted it to be the same section as B, so I just grabbed the loop and cloned it. But I wanted there to be some string upbeats. That was my idea. Maybe something different. Maybe I heard something cool in a track, and I wanted to give a guess at how to accomplish that thing. This is where I would write that information. And then I said, okay, I'm going to use, this sounds really complicated when I'm saying it all out loud like this. But if I go into Contact, or it just sounds like lengthy, but I promise you it's so much faster. And I'll go into Contact. I decided I wanted to use session strings and the animator sound. This is because I've familiarized myself with this particular ensemble quite a bit. And it came out like this. This is a moment where I would include an effects transition. I think that would be really useful. And the strings, I'd work on the strings a little bit more. But now I've reached my outro. I thought about doing C prime and another A recap, but I was doing this pretty quick, so I was like, we'll just do an outro. And now I can go in, I can refine it, perhaps add in those additional elements, begin to bring in development and look at phrasings and the way I constructed melodies and develop those harmonically. Add in new sounds, things that are unique to each part, and then consider with the vocalist what they would like to do next. And it looks pretty simple. There's a lot of parts in each one of these patterns. Like we can make it as one straight line, a whole beat, like whoa. But that is the process that will ideally just speed you up a ton. So define your elements as best you can. Essentially, you're going to do the whole song. And the more detailed you are here, the better it will be. Understanding how to break things down is just the secret here. Things are easy when you break them down into their components. They are way difficult in most cases when you try to consider the thing as a whole. In some cases, it's the exact opposite, but not in songwriting generally. So that's that. If this system works for you, great. Let me know. My challenge is for you to do another song, because in the last one I gave you this challenge. Use it and then drop how this affected your songwriting as a comment down in the description. Explain like, I really like this, or I don't like this, or I would change this about your approach, or how the approach affected you. Just give some feedback on what your experience was when doing it. If you have a system that you like to use that maybe is completely different than this system, then go ahead, drop it. But I'm willing to bet it's some sort of having an idea and a plan before you start doing stuff system. It's useful for sound design. It's useful for mostly anything. And that's how I like to break things down. If you have any questions, let me know. If you're wondering, this beat took me 20 minutes, maybe less. But yeah, it was very, very fast process just because I knew where stuff was. And because I had my plan, I was able to just bam, 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 bam. And away I went. Except for that, if I didn't include really this probably took me like 5 to 10 minutes to do. So maybe 30 with the inclusion of this, which is kind of embarrassing because it's a really simple sound. But I was experimenting, trying out some different stuff, having fun, attempting to make something more interesting because I was messing with distortion. And you see, I turned it off because I was like, this is a dumb idea and all sorts of things. I like using the M equalizer with this sort of a thing because it allows me to see the note that I'm using when I click. And I'm like, oh, that's so nice. So I can I knew I was in A minor. So I defined the scale I was in, the harmony I wanted to use. So I'm just going to go and use A as my bass drum. Like, so easy, right? If you have any questions, again, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.